This audio recording may not be reproduced without the express written permission of Robert Toporek. If Robert has passed, please contact the Rolf Institute about the use of this audio recording. The state of balance or imbalance in our bodies, its relationship to gravity, is reflected in behavior states, since self-expression is intimately involved with muscular tonus. Balance might be thought of as a resting state, a capacity and preparedness for responses of all kinds depending on the nature of the stimulus. Imbalance, then, is a response itself, the movement or impulse to movement, which completes by a return to balance when the response has been spent itself. But our lives are such that many responses never do complete themselves. Children, for example, may continually be shrinking away, lowering their head, raising their shoulders, and depressing their chest until the pattern becomes a norm for them. Or they may, like a racer waiting for a starting signal that never comes, build tension in their legs through an unfulfilled impulse to run away. The muscular tension and the behavior are two aspects of the same organic pattern. Dr. Rolf. Addendum. However, we are not born in balance or structurally integrated. Therefore, our bodies and lives remain in what could be called habits and patterns. Life begins to reinforce these patterns. By Rolfing babies at an early age, we can create a new pattern of structural integration. If we wait more than a year, we first have to work on the reinforcements. The older we become, the more ingrained are the patterns. However, Dr. Rolf distinguished that the body is a plastic medium and can be changed at any age. Robert Toporek, an advanced certified Rolf practitioner since 1975, who worked and studied extensively with Dr. Rolf the last 4 years of her life, and is pioneering the promise of Rolfing for babies, children, and families.
This is the Psychology Today cassette, one in a series of interviews and special presentations featuring contemporary clinicians, researchers, and educators discussing their work in the behavioral and social sciences. Today, editorial director Margie Norman talks to Ida P. Rolf, the remarkable biological chemist, now in her 80s, who created a body therapy called structural integration, more commonly known as Rolfing. Distortions of the body, according to Dr. Rolf, reflect distortions of the personality. When, through Rolfing, a body is brought back to its natural, healthy, vertical position, both physical and mental health are improved. By advocating these and other unorthodox beliefs, particularly about the plasticity of the body, Rolf has challenged the basic concepts of medicine's model of the human body and traditional views about the duality of mind and body. Moreover, her methods of deep body manipulation have been viewed by some as an audacious attack on human body tissue. Nevertheless, during the past half-century, thousands of persons have sought and apparently benefited from Rolfing, and though no control studies have been conducted to test Rolf's theories and methods, the testimony of her clients lends support to the efficacy of her techniques. Now, Margie Norman addresses her first question to Dr. Rolf.
Dr. Rolf, you developed a body treatment many, many years ago, which was called structural integration. Most of us, of course, know it as Rolfing, but many of us don't have a very clear idea of what Rolfing is. Can you explain what is Rolfing?
Well, in the first place, I'd like to suggest to you that your story of a body treatment is perhaps not quite precise. What we're really doing is a personal treatment in the sense that whereas while our hands are manipulating bodies, what we're really creating is a change in the personality. This is to be understood after all is said and done because in terms of how your body feels, you are either irritable or non-irritable, you're feeling off color or you're feeling very much on color and so forth, so that what we are really offering is a method of getting a person to behave and feel at an optimal level. By working with the body, it is possible to produce what is apparently personality change. I'm not saying you're going to change basic personalities, but I'm saying that you change the outward manifestation of the personality. If you see obvious defects in a body, it is our assumption and what we are offering in terms of philosophy that there will certainly be a very high likelihood that there will be a problem in the personality. That personality problems, that psychological problems, are literally anchored and nailed into the individual through changes that occur in the body and are not remedied unless they're taken on by expert individuals.
What happens to put the body in bad shape versus good shape? What would a good body look like versus a bad body?
As long as people have been looking at bodies professionally, so to speak, and I would say that this goes back to perhaps the early 20s of this century, it has been understood and taught that an ear should be over a shoulder should be over a hip should be over a knee should be over an ankle. And in other words, you have a verticality of a body, and that a good body shows up this verticality.
You're talking about body alignment.
I am talking about body alignment.
So is posture the same thing as body structure?
Posture is the outward and visible sign of what the structure is where you don't see it.
And so by looking at the correct body posture, you then know that you're in the correct vertical structure.
That the structure is taking care of itself, yes.
By Rolfing, you can help the individual to maximize their potential, both their physical potential and their mental and psychological potential.
Yes, this is what we claim, and this is what I think we can produce for you.
Now, exactly what is Rolfing? How do you produce these changes?
What we teach to the prospective Rolfer is a picture, or in other words, a template of what a body should look like, how it should look. What are the relations within the body? What sort of arms should a certain set of shoulders have? What sort of shoulders should a certain head have, etc. You very often find all kinds of disparities. Mother knows, for instance, that when she wants to make a dress for Mary, she's got to get a size 10 for the skirt and a size 8 for the blouse, etc. We all have seen this sort of thing. Now, this is not in accordance with the template, and our job is to bring a body toward that template and see that Mary, if she's got a size 10 skirt, is needing a size 10 blouse, or, contrary-wise, perhaps her hips are too big, she should have a size 8 skirt and a size 8 blouse. They should be in line, they should be matching, they should belong to the template. As we see it, we must bring a man or a woman toward the vertical. It is only when he is related to that vertical stance that I described before that he is able to have the best use of his physical body and its appurtenance as a mental body and an emotional body.
Now, is it your feeling that all bodies can be brought to this correct alignment?
No, but I do claim that all bodies can be brought toward that correct alignment.
What place does heredity have in our body structure and configuration?
Not that much.
Then most of it is learned, you're saying?
Most of it is accepted. It's learned in a certain sense, but it's also copied by the individual, which is hardly a learning situation. They copy somebody that they admire or they love. They copy father. Father comes in with all the woes of the world on his shoulders when he comes home at night. So little Johnny has to stoop over because then he's like Papa, who first is an admired and loved figure, but second is a powerful figure in the family, you know, so that he copies this sort of thing.
In other words, we start misusing our body structure when we're very young.
Exactly so. And then, of course, there are the infinite number of falls of childhood. And the time the child falls off the high chair, to the time the child falls down the cellar steps, to the time he climbs up on the roof to get an apple and falls off, and that sort of thing. And all of those impacts distort the body. Now, certain bodies are able to themselves spontaneously correct such distortions, but plenty of other bodies are not able to.
The distortions of the body, then, can come from having an accident and literally physically harming your body.
Exactly.
Or they can come from a personality that is, for instance, a very depressed person or an angry person might use their body in such a way that it would distort it.
Or in the world of the children, of course, it's largely a copying personality.
Let's get to the body manipulation itself. How does a Rolfer manipulate the body?
Well, there's one rule that I teach Rolfers. see where a given structure of soft tissue belongs, move it in that direction, and then demand that which is the normal movement. If you're moving an arm, your elbow will move straight in, for instance, but demand movement, because it is during movement that correction is made.
So what the Rolfer is manipulating then is literally body tissue.
Soft body tissue. This is important, that word soft. We are not manipulating bones. That's the job of the osteopath.
Now, when you do manipulate this soft body tissue, what happens? Is it broken down? What happens to it?
If you were a student of mine, you'd hear my voice go up into high G when you use that word broken down, because I am saying and repeating very loudly that there is no breaking down in the whole process. It is in general a building up. You build up the tissue which is lacking. You don't break down other structures.
I've heard a lot of people talk about the plasticity of the body when they're talking about Rolfing.
Yes, there's no question that the body is a plastic medium, and this is something which never was properly appreciated, let me say, 50 years ago or until quite recently. And fortunately, we were given the kind of material in our body which is plastic, which is able to elongate, to stretch, to change its position and so forth. The structure of the body is determined through the materials of the myofascial system. That is the envelopes in which muscles are contained.
And that's soft tissue, correct?
It is soft tissue, but it is of varying degrees of hardness. When you talk about muscles, you probably think of a unit. When I talk about a muscle, I think of material which is contained within an envelope, and that envelope is myofascial tissue. And that myofascial tissue can be organized and reorganized in accordance with the needs of the body. And it can come to grief and be disorganized also. And of course, the job of the Rolfer is to try to change disorganization toward organization.
And he does that by manipulating the fascial material.
That's right. Human beings have an instinct for order. They work best when their life, including their bodies, are orderly.
To move the tissue or to strengthen the tissue, what does it feel like?
If you hold out your arm, I'll just move that one bit of soft tissue over, and you move your arm. You do the moving. I do the holding.
So you are essentially holding my soft tissue and then telling
in the
me
direction in which it should go. I'm telling you to move it so that then you do the moving of it.
Does the individual whose tissue is somehow not in correct balance feel that imbalance?
Once in a while, sometimes, occasionally, they feel the imbalance, but for the most part, they have been living with this for months or years, and to them, this is me, is what they say to themselves. This is me. But on the other hand, when we correct it, they say, oh, that's right, that feels like a leg should feel. And you wonder how they know what a leg should feel like, because they never had a leg that felt like that, but they always intuitively know that. In other words, what we are saying is, what we are claiming is, that we can bring any man much nearer to the vertical.
And that is where the head is rests on the neck.
When he gets to the vertical, he looks at us with amazement and he says, I feel so much better. I feel so much lighter. I move so much better. I do so much more work. What have you done to me? And all we can say is, we haven't done a thing except to prepare your body so that the field of energy of the earth, the gravitational field, is able to work through your body and support it instead of tearing it down.
Now, we've talked about the link between the physical structure of the body and the personality. Now, when you are Rolfing an individual, you sometimes get more than simply physical effects. You may get emotional responses.
That is quite true.
Can you tell me, what are some of the experiences you have had with people during a Rolfing session?
Well, I remember very definitely the first very serious shall I call it, problem that I had when I was working on the little lady. She was about, I don't know, perhaps a 70-year-old. And all of a sudden, in the middle of my Rolfing, she was lying on a mat on the floor where I was Rolfing. All of a sudden, she started screaming. At the top of her lungs, she started screaming. And I started being terrified because after all is said and done, were the neighbors going to send for the cops? And what was I going to tell the cops when they knocked at the door? And could I leave the woman to open the door to the cops? And she kept right on screaming. And when I finally got the thing unlatched, I did it by saying to her, "Now, what do you see?" And she saw cars coming down the road. "Well, what do you hear?" Well, she heard a bell, and this bell developed into the ambulance bell. And she had been in an accident, in an automobile accident, where she had been very badly hurt. And she had been thrown out of the car, and this ambulance was coming to pick her up. And the cop was bawling the driver out and saying to him, "You don't know how to drive, you'll never know how to drive," etc., etc. And all this unconscious woman lying on the ground was hearing. And this was what she was reproducing on my mat.
Now, was that because you had manipulated part of her body that brought that?
I had brought her body back from the changes that had occurred in there to the normal position which it had had before she was in this accident.
A lot of people, when they think of Rolfing, think of pain. Is it a painful manipulation?
That very greatly depends on the individual. If the individual is set that they're going to resist it, it will be painful. There is no question about it. If, on the other hand, they're going to accept what they have not as pain but as intense sensation and go with it, they won't express it as pain. Many, many times, if I've given, say, a first hour of Rolfing, and I'll say at the end of it, "Well, Mrs. Jones, I think we've had about as much as we can take on today. We just better call it a day, and we'll get to it again next week," or something of this sort. And she'll look up wide-eyed and she'll say, "But John told me there was so much pain. When is the pain coming?"
That's wonderful. Now, when you say go with it, does that mean relaxation?
Relax into the pain, sure. So it's painful, so what? That's the attitude that I'm trying to express.
I'm curious to know also about the people who have been Rolfed. I think you've probably Rolfed people of all ages.
And all colors and all conditions.
Why, for instance, would you Rolf a very small child? And yet I understand children have been Rolfed.
Because practically every child is not normal at birth. They've been through a very heavy experience, and that heavy experience has distorted their bodies. Sometimes it is simply that their body hasn't grown to a normal template during birth and will, if left alone, approximate it, but maybe even hasten it up. Rolfing in general can be described as being a technique which matures an individual. And if we take, for instance, a 2-month-old baby and we Rolf him, all of a sudden we find we have a 5-month-old baby or a 6-month-old child. At least this is the way he's behaving.
Now, are the effects of Rolfing different then on people of different ages?
Well, they all tend to mature, but is bringing them toward a position of mature, standing on their own 2 feet, being assured of their own position and their own capability and their own independence.
So it's not only body maturity, it's psychological and emotional.
It's a personality maturity, yes, by all means.
Now, what about men and women? Are there characteristic misalignments that go along with sex?
Oh, yes, there are apt to be, but less because of sex than because of the different way in which we bring up sex-different individuals. A little boy is taught to throw balls, and a little girl is taught something else. A little boy will be overdeveloped, perhaps, in the shoulders and arms, and his sister won't be because she hasn't been using her shoulders and arms, you see.
How would that be manifest, for instance, in differences on older men and women? I mean, mature, so-called 20, 30, 40-year-olds. Would there be differences, characteristics of the two sexes?
This completes the first part of our discussion. We continue on side 2. We now continue our discussion with Dr. Ida P. Rolf.
Would you expect if you reached out and touched a man's arm that you would think it was a woman's arm?
No. I think of that difference as coming from the physical structure, the difference in the muscles.
Yeah, but it's a question of how they've been trained to use their muscles. I mean, that boy has gone through an entirely different set of training from that girl. However, don't quote me as saying the two are the same and they can be made the same. They can't, and they never will, and they never have. Occasionally, you get girls that are going toward the male pattern, but they don't get to the male pattern, and the other aspect is true, too. You'll get men going toward the female pattern, but they don't get to the female pattern.
Well, now, as a result of Rolfing, then, would the individual, like the girl, get more like a girl?
More like the girl, more like an athletic girl, but nevertheless more like a girl, and her behavior will be more feminine, too.
Would you think that everyone could benefit from being Rolfed?
Oh, yes, I don't think there's any doubt but that they could.
Are there any counterindications to Rolfing? Is there something that a person ought to be concerned about?
No, not really, except that legally, for example, if a Rolfer takes on a person who has been diagnosed as cancer, he is legally in a lot of trouble.
So an individual should not look at Rolfing as a medical treatment, but should look at it as an educational process to re-educate
This is
the
what
body.
we are interested in doing. We are interested in educating for the best possible use of the body and the personality of the individual.
If I walked into a Rolfer's office, what would I expect to happen to me in that first session?
You would expect to get your shoulders more horizontal, your chest raised, your back probably flattened.
Now, how does the person diagnose this? I know some Rolfers take
Just
pictures.
Look at it. We don't do that for our own use. We do that for the patient, because that patient never believes, never, I underscore never, believes that he is able to make the change which we later show him, or that he has made that change. If we show him that picture at the end of 10 hours, he doesn't believe what he looked like before the first hour. So that our pictures are really part of the psychological treatment that we give to people.
After the first session, will I notice any change in my body?
You probably will notice a very great change in your body. You probably will. There are occasionally people who say that they don't feel the change. Somewhere along the line, you'll get to the place where you'll say, oh my God, I worked so hard yesterday, and here I am working today. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't have done that.
Could you describe the re-educational process? What does it consist of? How many sessions, how far apart, etc.?
Well, on the whole, our basic cycle is a cycle of 10 sessions.
Now, are they weekly?
Just catch as catch can. Many times we have somebody that's come up from South America and he's going to stay until Saturday, and how many sessions can we give him? Well, he'll be back from South America probably 6 months from now. Well, at that time, maybe he'll be staying for 3 sessions. Well, if we give him 3 now and 3 then, he'll have 6, and then maybe he won't be back for 5 years.
So the 10 sessions can be taken quite close together, or they can be strung out?
Yes, they're better not taken that close together. It's better to take about a month for the 10 sessions or 6 weeks.
Each session, is there a logical progression of what is worked on?
Oh, you bet there is. You just bet there is. And this depends on what the body shows. But the bodies always show the same sort of progression. Only sometimes the shoulders in one individual may need a great deal more work than the shoulders in another. But that doesn't say that in the session where it is basically hips rather than shoulders that are getting worked on, that we'll stay with those shoulders. We'll go to the hips and bring them along. Because many times as we organize the hips, the shoulders begin to find out what life should be like for shoulders. And many times you'll be working on their legs below the knees and they'll say, oh, funny things are happening in my shoulders.
And we don't know why.
To a certain extent, we know why, because there are fascial connections in the body, not always direct. But you see, as one fascial sheath stops being pulled taut, it allows its neighbor also to relax and get nearer to where it belongs, etc., etc.
How would the progression go? You'd start from the top and move down?
No,
or?
we start doing the whole thing in the first hour. And then from there, we're apt to go to the feet because in the first hour, we don't get much below the knees. And in the second hour, we're apt to do the feet and the legs, which were neglected in the first hour. And then all of a sudden, we see that the back doesn't look as handsome as it did at the end of the first hour, so we go to that. But we find in classes, for instance, we teach a half a dozen people in a row so that the student can see the half a dozen people. And those half a dozen people will all show the same type of picture. If they're all in the second hour, they will all show that their legs and feet need work. If they're in the third hour, they will all show that the side of their bodies seem too short for the front and the back of their bodies. If they're in the fourth hour, the inside of their legs will look as though they didn't belong to the outside of their legs. They'll all show that same similarity of change.
When somebody completes the 10 sessions, does that mean for the rest of their life that their body will stay in the proper alignment?
No, but because what happens at the end of those 10 sessions is that disalignments that have been much deeper in the body than we were able to reach will begin to surface.
So that means that you may need more work.
You may need more work, but after a while, give it time to surface, give it time to show up. And it will depend on who has come. Is it somebody who's been crippled by polio? Obviously, if it's somebody that's been crippled by polio, you're not expecting to get the same sort of grand development that you're going to get in a 16-year-old college girl who's a thoroughly normal, healthy child.
For a certain percentage of people, they need more than the initial 10 treatments.
Yes, but any human being can be made to operate very much more happily and soundly through those 10 hours of work. And then if they happen to be in an automobile accident or falling down the stairs or something of that sort, they probably need some resuscitation and replacement of what then goes wrong.
For most clients, though, the 10 sessions will be adequate.
For most clients, the 10 sessions will give them a package with which they're very well content.
After the 10 sessions, will the person recognize the changes, the physical changes, and the psychological changes?
Well, the family will recognize the psychological changes.
What kinds of things have you heard families say about?
I've been called up on the telephone and said, now, this is Mrs. So-and-so, who's the mother of Mrs. So-and-so, and I just called up to thank you for how much more peaceful our household is.
The person becomes easier to live with.
That's right. Easier to get along with.
Now, what about the physical change? What will they notice physically?
Well, I don't know what they notice physically, but I show them a picture to show them what's there to be seen physically, and then they can go and look for it if they haven't noticed it already. But most of the time, if a woman hasn't been able to lift her arms above her head for 20 years, she'll find out pretty quick when she is able to. But you see, that sort of thing, obviously, they must see. The usual way the women come in, exultant because they can fasten their bra in the back. One dinner party I went to, and I was keeping an ear out as to what my neighbors were saying, and here were two men next to me talking, and one was saying to the other, "Oh, my wife is so excited over this Rolfing, she's had to buy a bigger bra."
You mean it actually, literally, it changed her configuration in a very nice way, probably. Well, what about the relationship of body structure to physical health? Do you find that when you restructure the body?
Of course. There's no question about that. No question whatsoever. Physical ill health is always the outward and visible sign of a structural problem.
And by Rolfing and correcting the structural...
To the extent that you correct that structural problem, you increase that physical health. No question about that.
Do people actually report to you that they are sick less often or that they feel better?
Sure. Oh, sure. And that they're doing that much more work and et cetera, et cetera.
Does the work on the body go along also with psychotherapy?
Yes, of course. And if we can have people doing psychotherapy at the same time, that's fine. But in general, people don't have that much free money, you see. But if it's possible to do it that way, this is by all odds the best way to do it.
Have there been any follow-up studies of the effects of Rolfing on clients, or have you kept in touch with people?
I have people that I've kept in touch with for 28 or 30 years. And sometimes those are people who are victims of accidents. They're never going to be normal people again. But I keep in touch with them to be sure that they're doing as well as they could be doing. We have never had the kind of money that makes it possible to have an organization to do what I would call follow-up studies. But certainly I see people that I worked on many, many years ago, and they look very different. They know they look different. They know they feel different. They say, "You'll never know what you did for me." And when they say that, I just go my way and know that my job is
And
done.
smile a lot.
Yeah.
Rolfing sounds like a technique which is not simple. Nobody can just run out and
No,
decide to be a
it's not-
Rolfer.
It's not simple.
What is the training that a Rolfer receives?
Well, if we take in people who have no background in physiology or anatomy or the medical, biological sciences, the first thing we do is give them almost a year of reading.
In physiology and biology
in all
and chemistry.
kinds of things that have to do with the biological sciences. If, on the other hand, they have had pre-medical training or medical training and so forth, they've had a lot of this and they go on into something more highly specialized. At the end of that time, they are supposed to write us a report answering certain questions which we give them. The point of these questions being to find out whether that individual, in answering that question, goes to the textbook and copies the textbook, or whether he takes the material and constructs an idea independently.
Now, when you say we, whom are you speaking of?
Mostly Ida P. Rolf.
Okay, so you are still the individual who
Directs.
certifies and directs the training.
Yeah.
After the person gets the basic academic training in the medical disciplines, and you question to be sure,
Biological
disciplines, then
They go into what we call an auditing class. Now, the auditing class consists in that individual coming to a proper manipulating Rolfing class. There'll be perhaps 6 people learning Rolfing manipulation in this class, and there may be 10 or 15 of them sitting around as what we call auditors, looking at the changes, learning to see. Auditing is not learning to hear, but learning to see.
so the auditor has not yet started doing the manipulations
That's
him or
right.
herself.
That's right. He's
All right.
learned to see what needs to be manipulated and how, when it's manipulated in this fashion, it changes. And he learns to see that if you do 6 people in a second hour and do their feet, lo and behold, they all show the same thing. He learns to see that if somebody walks in and says, "Well, I've had several treatments from somebody on the East Coast and I don't quite know how many," he learns to see that he should be able to tell.
Exactly how many treatments that
Exactly
person
how
has
many
had
treatments
by
that-
the body configuration.
right.
That's fascinating.
right.
That's fascinating. When does the person finally begin to learn how to do the manipulations? Is that the next
Well,
step?
after the auditing, they are put through very careful screening. If we think that there's any good reason why they should not become practitioners, why we try to eliminate them at that point and not let them go on and waste more time and more money.
Would this be that they essentially, during the auditing phase, obviously could not learn to discriminate the differences?
Partly they
or
can't learn, and it's partly they don't relate to people. A Rolfer has to be able to relate to a person to make that individual, that client, feel that he is sympathetic with him, that they're working together, they're working on one project. We try to weed out people who, by temperament of one sort or another, we feel are inappropriate for Rolfers.
Can people of all different kinds of body types be Rolfers, or
Yes, we prefer the mesomorph, but we do take on other types. But they've got to be sturdy, and they've got to have been Rolfed long before they come into any kind of training of ours.
yes, you need physical strength to
You
become
need
a
a
Rolfer?
great deal of physical strength.
Now tell me about yourself. Are you still actively practicing Rolfing?
On occasion. I don't earn my living that way. I earn my living teaching Rolfing. But on occasion, when somebody has a client that they are not being able to really bring along where they think they should, they may bring him over to see me and try to find out from me what it is they haven't done, what they should be doing. I also do a good deal of work with babies.
For those listeners that might be interested in learning more about Rolfing, or locating a Rolfer in their neighborhood? Is there someplace they can write?
We have an institute centered in Boulder, Colorado, to which they can write and where they can get all kinds of information as well as booklets and so forth, and ask them for a recommendation of somebody, the closest Rolfer to himself. The address of this is the Rolf Institute, Box 1868, Boulder, Colorado. 80306 is the zip code.
Most of the Rolfers that I know of are men, and yet you, a woman, established the discipline. Are there many women Rolfers?
There are, I don't know, what, a quarter maybe. It's too hard work for any but a very heavy-set, sturdy woman.
What about your methods and their acceptance in more traditional disciplines?
As a matter of fact, 1 out of every 10 of our Rolfers is an MD. We have acceptance from the services in Washington. We are no longer an unknown small number of people. And the Office of Innovative Education in Washington not only accepts us, but likes us and takes us out to dinner and so forth and so forth.
We have said that if you get the 10 sessions, that would probably be an ample amount
for the average
person.
That's true.
Now, how much is that going to cost?
Well, there are different sets of fees under different circumstances. I mean, if a man is working in a poverty-stricken community, he will probably charge them perhaps $25 an hour, whereas a man who's working in a place like New York City will be charging $50 an hour.
Now, how widespread is Rolfing? Is it available in all the 50 states?
Well, we have, I think, about 160 Rolfers. We have 80 in the state of California and 1 in the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Florida, there are quite a few.
How many Rolfers are being trained?
Each year brings a greater number of applications.
In conclusion, what has Rolfing meant to you and your life?
Well, I suspect that I'm sitting here talking to you and being out here 3,000 miles away from my home by virtue of Rolfing, thanks to Rolfing. I don't think I would be alive if it hadn't been for Rolfing, and I certainly would not have been walking.
Well, you're a very delightful woman. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you kindly for the compliment.
Thank you, Dr. Rolf.
This concludes our discussion with Dr. Ida P. Rolf. You have been listening to one in a series of Psychology Today cassettes on subjects in the behavioral and social sciences.